Jenx, I want to welcome you to Occult of Personality podcast. It's really great to speak with you, and I'm thrilled to be able to have this conversation with you. Um, I really enjoyed reading about Thai occultism. I have to admit that I had a somewhat of an introduction to it by having some extensive conversations with my friend Joseph Uccello, who
Yeah,
I think used to live in Chiang Mai for an
that's where I
extended
am
amount of
now.
time.
Yeah.
And he would tell me stories about things that he encountered on his journeys through the city. And
Mm.
it very much resonated with me, those talks, when I was reading through your book. And I was like, I almost could feel like I was there. It just reminded me so much of like the conversations and like reading your book and then seeing the photographs. It was like, yeah, you could, I could almost feel like I was right there. So thank
Well, I
you.
think that was the point of the first book, to be honest with you, particularly
Yeah.
because Chiang Mai is such a remarkable place. And this area is just incredible. The way they have kept the culture is just mind-boggling. How it has been kept in its exact form, unless they come up with a better way of dealing with the same problem or a better development of that particular spell. It's just breathtaking. And it's something that all of us can feel if they come to this, if anybody visits this area.
Mm.
It's on the surface, it's available, you can see it in daily life almost. And because of that, it's a privilege to live here, to be honest.
That's wonderful. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, give us an introduction to who you are and what you do.
Okay. My name is Jenx, Peter Jenx, and I resided in Manchester for 20 years. I stayed there after going to university, which coincided with the rise of Manchester music and dance music and all the warehouse parties, the hacienda. And I ended up involved in the music industry to the point, and the club industry, to the point where I ended up managing a nightclub for 4 or 5 years
Mm.
towards the end of the 90s after everybody had stopped shooting each other. And the latter of which is a very important point. the But earlier than that, I've always kind of had friends who were magicians or witches. It's just been something that's been part of my life and a privilege at the same time, because if we can meet people who have ability in magic, it brings with it, in my opinion, it brings with it a natural intelligence that can be quite breathtaking
Mm.
and maybe more of an education than anything I've studied formally at university.
Yeah.
Formal education is not the same as education in life
Mm.
at all.
Mm-mm.
You're just telling them what they've told you in many respects.
Yeah.
And I realized that once I'd finished the degree, that was that. I'd learned that particular aspect and was ready to go out into the world. And once I started coming to Thailand in 1991, I always knew from the first week there that I would live here because of a natural familiarity with Thailand and from where I come from, which is the UK. They're very, very similar in the respect that if you look, the veil between the worlds is thin in both locations in a very similar manner.
Mm.
So I felt immediately at home and eventually moved here full time after finishing doing the nightclubs and whatever else I had to do at that time in 2002. So I've been here for 22 years. And I think everybody starts off, there's an odd relationship with Thailand that people can have, whereby what Thailand shows you depends on what you are ready to listen to or accept. It will only open itself when you open yourself. So it comes to fill a knowledge, desire for knowledge within. And this can be seen in the history of Thailand entering the modern, so-called modern world, whereby the first things that people learned about was Thai food and then Muay Thai and Thai massage. And slowly these aspects of life opened to the world. Now, I'd actively avoided studying or following any form of magic all my life because I didn't want the kind of the architecture of it to get in the way of the friends I had, which included, Peter Christopherson from Coil, Jeff, and Jen, and all that particular circle of people. And I'm still adore Chris and Cozy as well. And once Sleazy passed, and there was a period of turmoil, which is always the case when an important magician passes, as things kind of settle themselves again in whatever world he has created. I felt the need to start investigating Thai Occult. And on my first amulet, I experienced an opening to life. It was something that removed something from me, whereby I was free to gain all the natural good fortune I had as a person, and just gain a path that was missing at that time. And I quickly realized that there was nothing reliable written about the system, and nothing reliable coming from the mouths of the magicians themselves. So I set about writing a book. And the first book, which is not Thai Occult 1, it's just the first book, it has a red cover, was about what we thought we knew, because I thought that we should start from the original standpoint of what was available before moving forward. And this just shows my training as a scientist at university, so it did come in handy in the end. From that point, I was visiting Chiang Mai at that point and wanted to do a book about Sakyan, the magical tattoos of Thailand. And for the first time, interviewed the Ajahns. Now, this couldn't be too complicated. And it was a way for the Ajahns to understand that books could change people's perspective of those particular magicians.
Mm-hmm.
And the interviews were quite simple. We have improved on it vastly since, I might add. But it was important to also prove to these guys, because they get people coming along promising all sorts of stuff, I'm sure. So the first job that had to be done was to show them that I wasn't one of those, that I could fulfill what I said I was going to do. Now, the original Thai Occult Sakyan had loads of problems associated with it that we had to fight through. But in the end, I could put a book in their hands and say, okay, I want to do a book on Thai Sayasat, which is the Thai Occult itself. And because I'd already proved that, pardon me, everybody was on board. And that turned into a gargantuan task, because that book is well over 500 pages long, and everything had to be researched and written about, and where we could, references made. Mm. So I also had to find all the references throughout publishing of the last century and this one, that referenced anything to do with the history or knowledge of both the Thai occult and actually also the Burmese magical practices, because we included a section on that due to having some Burmese magicians in Chiang Mai.
Hmm.
On that coming out, and it was very rough, it was written in a deliberately circular manner whereby the book had to be understood as a whole before you had an understanding of the actual system. And this arises because of the way, this arose because of the way the Thai magicians themselves use their knowledge to explain it. And it comes from a saying called mi sen, which means that everything has a connection.
Mm-hmm.
So, like a bowl of noodles, because sen is the qualifier for the amount of noodle strands as well. And so the book is deliberately written as an intertwined conglomerate of words that will only make true sense when we have read all of it. And I am convinced that that book is actually, if we can use the vastly overused term, haunted, because whoever plays with that book, the Jack Grail edited it for the new release, the re-release of it. When I was editing it, it messes with your computer and it does weird things to life, because it's the first time the system has ever been written about from the perspective of a person who respects the magicians themselves and the system itself. And that's why it worked. And that's why we were then accepted by the system of magic and the practitioners of the magic itself as well, because both were definitely involved in the process of acceptance.
Could you describe a little bit about the sort of like the combination of Buddhist perspective and the more traditional, older Thai magical perspective, spiritual perspective that and and I'm not really clear because it's not my system and I'm not really familiar with it, but can you talk a little bit also when you describe this about sort of the nature of their relationship with spirits, ghosts, and deities, and kind of how those are thought of in distinct ways?
To look at the system itself, I think it's important to separate the more animist aspects, which are obviously older. So let's look at it as the more ancient aspects and the more modern Buddhist aspects. Now, when I say modern, Buddhism only came here 1,500 years ago. So I think there's actually three layers that we have to look at here. One is the ancient, one is the Buddhist, and one is from about 50 to 80 years ago, because within the last 200 years, say, because it changed again, the relationship. So to look at the ancient stuff, we have to understand or accept what proof we have that it's, first of all, old, and secondly, that it was used. Because the first levels of magic, of course, in this region, there is nothing written. There is no history kept of the ordinary people. And if it was of what we call Damra books, which are the fold-out books that carry the knowledge of various forms of magic, all those rot within 1 or 2 generations. So every generation has to rewrite them. So we can't really rely on those. But what we can rely on is the structure of the spells itself and the language used. Now, I believe that some aspects of Thai magic go back before written language was used, because some of it, like the basic elements of using some plants, of recognizing what is magic, I think is the best way of it. And that doesn't necessarily need a written form. It can be passed on orally, and training can be in a traditional way, whereby they are using the natural elements and products available from nature to create something that can be of benefit for mankind. There would have been using brightly colored insects or beetle shells for sene, which is attraction. There will be, but you also have to consider the state of the community and the culture at that time, because it was probably phenomenally dangerous. So we have the dominance of man over the powers of nature with such things as tigers. Tiger magic here is both strong, original, and ancient, and can have a great effect on life, even though it's probably best to use older remains that were from a beast in the wild. They are disappearing now. The remains tend to come from alternative sources, shall we say, but not wild sources. So there's going to be stuff for protection. There's going to be stuff to combat the more powerful elements of nature. This can also include things like snake skin, boar's teeth, anything that is attractive, butterfly wings, or anything that's naturally used for to help people find a mate, find and be protected through their lives. And the first recognition as to what plants are going to be useful, because these plants can be seen. We were on the market. Yes, quick aside, we were on the market yesterday and buying organic vegetables, and somebody was selling some flowers. And Bon, my partner, pointed to a clipping from a tree, and he said, "Wan," which is the name for a plant that you use in Thai magic. And it was the most strangely flowered tree branch. And you could feel the magic coming from it as if it was an amulet itself. Now, we've had this when we've cut open dried roots from the plant market up in Chiangdao, things like that. You open it and you can feel the wave of magic come from them. So if we can do that now, that will have been part of the most ancient method, as will the collection of certain minerals, certain iron ores, things like that. Anything that could hold the charge of a blessing. Okay. On top of that came the kata brought probably by the Lursi, the Rusi, and then, more importantly, the kata brought by Buddhism. Now, Buddhism entered Thailand via Bangkok, via the south, and they can chart the changes in language used as it spread throughout the country, or at least people smarter than I am, linguists, can chart this. Buddhism at that time always overlaid what was present. It did not alter culture. It was a surface layer on the top. It was a spirituality at the level of spirituality that people had to rise to. It did not fall to them and alter their beliefs in other respects. And this is the case in Japan. It's the case wherever Buddhism took hold. Buddhism brought the language of magic, because the kata was sacred. So everything related to it brought a sacred aspect to it, which meant that they could find refuge with the Buddha.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a refuge in Buddhism is incredibly important in this system because when they're playing with ghosts, and that's a direct translation, it is rooted in the protection of Buddhism, which is why most Ajahns have been monks as part of their training.
Mm-hmm.
That and the fact that monk training is the best form of training that they can have in the production of magic itself by the adaptation of some of the training methods.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are some aspects of this system that we can prove are ancient and probably occurred before Buddhism came because of the story of Kunpen, which is logged as being from the 16th century. They have translations from that time, and the story has changed throughout the generations that rewrote it. So in this story, which is probably from around the 15th century, there are stories of making breastplates from pieces of skull that are tied together by the hair of slain warriors. The skull pieces actually came from those warriors as well.
Mm-hmm.
There are belts of Beneng, and Beneng actually means belt in, I think it's in Indonesian, if I remember correctly. Which is, again, you would have third eye pieces from the skulls of the slain within a belt that you then direct the ghosts. Now, with working with things of that potency, you need to have a refuge with the Buddha, and you need to only use a ghost for mutual benefit.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot force a ghost because it will turn on you. So there has to be, because of that, there has to be a benefit for each ghost to want to reside and help the living. Now, this is one of the most important aspects of the system because, as with much of Thai society, there has to be mutual benefit. And when a person dies before their time through war, accident, calamity, whatever, their ghost will be extremely potent because it's like they have had time stolen from their natural lifespan. But during that time, they have to reside in hell. So a deal is made whereby the ghost receives merit from providing for the living. And everything is transactional in Thai. Everything. It's just part of the culture. So, like where people become upset that Kunpen, as part of the original story, roasted his own baby that he cut out of the mother to use as a spirit familiar to attack people, which would have been utterly ferocious. It actually describes the process of doing this within the story. Now, that eventually became one of the best-known aspects of Thai occultism, one of the best-known products, which is the Kuman Tonk. But a Kuman only exists to serve people that take care of that spirit and make merit for it to help it rise in the underworld until it can become an angel. Now, on that becoming an angel, it can still decide to be of use to people. And so there has to be a rising up, there has to be a benefit for people, for the ghosts themselves, to be able to rise and benefit from supporting the living. And that is sorted out from the spell itself and the psyche of the Ajahn or the monk that produces that form of magic. So, the third level of this is when basically the magic started opening to the people within the culture itself. And that really started, they reckon, a couple of 100 years ago, but the biggest evidence of this is within the last 120 years, something like that. And it began with the monks producing items to help their devotees to a better life, because that raised money so they could help people, they could build the temple, and everything was starting to circulate for the mutual benefit of the community. It is also when Satyan actually started to become popular, and that completely changed the magic of Satyan. Before that time, the earliest Satyan were the trouser yants, which were just images of various animals, depending on the culture it came from, to dots, to circles, which is regarded as the first letter is a circle in the whole of culture, to very, very just simple lines of kata, simple figures, things like that. And from the popularity coming, it then developed into imagery and more beautiful aspects of the art. As with all things, we then had what I always refer to as the great generation of monks, which came about because of the change in training from the development of meditation by one of the fathers of meditation here, and the Tamawet system, which are the forest monks called Luang Pu Man or Ajahn Man. And Ajahn Man was a tough old guy. He would live in the forest on his own and believed in confronting the fears within us all for spiritual, to raise the strength of the people and the spiritual body itself, which gave birth to the great generation of monks here who have now pretty much all passed. At the moment, everything is now passing to the Ajahns. So the Ajahns, because of basically Buddhism becoming more of an organized religion, they want to kind of reject any use of the ancient forms of magic and only use Buddhist magic, which is purely white and can be incredibly effective still, depending on what we need within our lives to improve our lives. So now we have the schism, whereby it is the Ajahns themselves who are playing with the more difficult aspects of the system when looking at it from an outside perspective.
That's really fascinating kind of wrinkle.
It's a lot, isn't it? It's a lot of history, and we to view it in one description is incredibly difficult, which is why we ended up doing Thai Occult 2. And also we were bored during the pandemic and thought we may as well do something.
It makes sense.
And then that laid rise to Thai Occult 3 as well. But each book actually is an expression of what we talked about earlier, whereby things open as soon as you walk into anything here with an open attitude and the correct intention.
Yeah, I felt like that's true. Even I don't even think you necessarily have to be physically there for it to happen that way. Peter Jenx, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing some really profound and magical stories of the Thai occult with us, because I mean, I've been studying magic for a long time. I've even practiced it a little bit, but some of the things you're talking about here are really like way, way, way off the charts. And I know, like, I have a little bit of familiarity with that caliber of magic just from witnessing people or beings near me who do that sort of thing, but
Mm.
I don't. And I just appreciate the fact that you are able to share this with us because it's really special.
I just think because this is my role, this is my job. Yeah. But I just think, why is it coming out now? There's a reason for this. And if any of this inspires anybody or provides anybody with the help they need, of any type, it's an absolute pleasure to be able to make that happen. As it is a pleasure to be able to take people to go and sit with these guys, and experience it for themselves. Because these are just my experiences. There's only one person. A true understanding comes from when many, many, many people understand.
Where can people find you online, and where can people get your books?
The ThaiOccult.com, all one word, all lowercase. And Miskatonic Books very kindly edited the first volume again, which turns into an enormous book. Oh, poor Jack Grail. I will forever say sorry to Jack Grail for having to edit that book because it messed with his computer as well. And that's available now. And I have they already released Thai Occult 2, but I thought at this time it was a good time to have all my books available at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And she's never going to happen again. So we have Thai Occult 1 in the States, and it has to be in the States. It's only really useful for people to order from the States because the postage is just terrible
Yeah.
going outside the States. North America is okay. And I have reprinted 100 Thai Occult 2, a couple of hundred of Thai Occult 3. I've rewritten the Satyam book to be able to be the best it can be. And I've also written a book, which we did in the pandemic, called Supernatural Thailand, which is about the places of power within this country.
Nice.
And again, that is to encourage people to find their own places to go and sit. Yeah. So it's kind of after this, there's no more books. There'll just be PDFs. That'll
Mm-hmm.
be it.
That'll be it. Wow.
Which, I know that's easier for a lot of people, but I just wanted everything to be available.
Yeah.
And it'll all be gone by Christmas.
Wow. Thank you so much for talking with me tonight. And for our listeners, I'm sure this has been quite an experience.
It's been lovely.